can talk about all the guests that we've had so far
Okay.
on the podcast and the eclectic nature of what that is. So we'll just dive in and talk about that.
Okay.
I might have to. We've been doing so many episodes and so many. We've got a lot. We've got a lot coming. We have a lot that we've already done. But let me just check in with you because I haven't asked you. What do you think of the vibe of the and the different subject matter that we've been kind of diving into with this podcast so far?
I actually, this is one of my favorite things I get to work on because it is so diverse. And I mean, you're covering a lot of things. Like you've got how people see their roles in entertainment. You've talked about that a couple times, where it's not just about being entertaining and being putting on a show. It's about what that does to people, how that makes people feel. And then you have like Johan, who comes on as an executive coach. And those conversations are great to eavesdrop on, but they're actually good for you. And so we're getting to see you go through growth and kind of
Yeah.
evolution and thinking about things. So we're in, as an audience member, we're in your shoes, kind of seeing you go through that. And then you have like Sheena, who had this really great conversation just about confidence and what that looks like and how we we have maybe the wrong definitions of it depending on our own situation. And I mean, so far it's been kind of wild that we've kind of had all this stuff, but it all fits so nicely under the umbrella.
Yeah, and I agree. Like with the people that you've hooked me up with, and the people that I know, and then some people that have come into my just general knowledge and got connected with them, literally learning who they are through doing the podcast, like Ashina. Uh, it is something that I love about doing podcasts is that I'm also on the journey with everybody else. I'm learning, but I'm also feeling like with somebody like Johan, I'm getting free coaching from an amazing coach, but also the parallels of what I do versus, athletes in the world, what he does. And as he said, he's learning something about those parallels, which is cool too.
Yeah.
And yeah, you get to be the fly on the wall or the Ed McMahon, as I like to say.
Well, the nice thing with him is that, like, I brought this up in our second part with him, is that when I shifted from being counselor guy, crisis worker, active member of community doing good to being full-time podcaster guy, I was kind of lost to define how I was doing anything worthwhile. I mean, it
Yeah.
really was hard for me to do that, find anything that I could say, yeah, what I'm doing is important. And then when he came along and we did From the Future with Love, that was the first time I did a show that I'm like, oh, I can have a positive impact in the world, even if it's not just my voice, but it's what I'm doing to help other voices get out there. And I mean, I've done that with you. I've done that with other people since then. And it really did change the way I see, in a weird way, this silly thing I do of podcasting.
Well, I say I kind of when I first started podcasting, I felt the same way. Like, what am I saying, and who cares? And am I making an impact? And does anybody? And this was with Confessions of an Actress, just in telling stories about behind the scenes of the entertainment industry. I'm like, maybe it's interesting. I don't know, but this podcast, and I always throw back, love to you for kind of pushing me to do it. It is something where I do feel like my intention every time, and I talk to you about this, whether we're off the air or now here on a behind the scenes look, is the intention is to do good in the world. That's what it is. And I think for us, you say this all the time, you don't really have perspective of what that good is. And I don't think you do either. I know you've had a couple people come up to you and say, "Gosh, you sound like that guy on the podcast." And you're like, "I am that guy." And then you go, "Oh my gosh." And then they talk about the thing, that they talk about you at the dinner table or whatever it
Yeah.
is. And we, as the person, don't necessarily, that goes back to the imposter syndrome, or we just don't think about what we're doing
Mhm.
and just from our voice. But it is very primal. When I watch something like it, a comedian get on stage and it's just them talking and they're really telling stories. They're doing it in a brilliant, funny way, but they're doing not doing anything different than we are. We're at a microphone, we're telling our stories in our life. And I think, as Johan has said, the more vulnerable and authentic you can be, the more that connects with people, whatever your story is. And what I find fascinating, we're going to dig into more, is your story and how eclectic that is. That's something that we're playing around with the format. We're gonna pop in and out. We've
Mhm.
had you pop in and out of some of our recent interviews, which I think is brilliant. And that organic feeling of doing that in a way where you're like, I have to say something. I'm like, let's do it. Let's talk because that's what this is.
Yeah.
And going by that gut instinct and connecting in that way, I find is it's exciting. I think it's great. And I think we're already putting so much good into the world just 2 months in, 3 months
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
ish.
Yeah. We're looking
Yeah.
in the middle of our third month with this show. And I mean, I gotta hand it to you. You're getting traction in ways that I still haven't. I've been at 11 years.
Well, everybody who is listening to this, please go give you some traction because I want the good to go back to you. But that's the thing I never paid attention to before. I don't know I need to pay attention more to the business side of show, but the show side or the creative side is really, and I do think that is people can tell when you're doing something for the likes or if you're doing something for the, ooh, what's my analytics and stuff like that. And I don't ever want that, but I feel like whatever I'm doing is resonating. I say one of the biggest episodes analytic wise or whatever you want to say is the pregnant at 49, which I didn't plan that. I didn't
all,
plan and I can't
all the way around.
all the way around.
Situation, topic, conversation,
I
aftermath, all of it was unplanned.
talking about certain personal things. That's not going to happen every,
Yeah.
that's an anomaly, but I also feel that that's hit home for some people and that's okay. That to me is giving back
And
and I'm
I think
glad.
that though allowing those anomalies to happen give your show a character and give people insight into who you are. Because if you didn't allow for that kind of story to be out there and to slide into the show, then you are doing something else. But the fact that you did, it's a very different kind of feeling. People have an insight now, not just into you as a person, but you as a mom, you as a host, you as a person willing to share, and those kind of
Yeah.
things. It matters. People will start showing up for your show because of you instead of showing up for the guests.
Well, that's sweet. I
They'll start showing up regardless of who you have on because they like you. Uh,
regardless of whoever, so everybody else that's going to come onto my show, it's not going to be about you. It's about me. No,
no, but you know what I mean, though. Like my
I
show,
know what you
my
mean. I know
my
what you mean.
shows fluctuate based on who's on,
Yeah.
because one, I've worked really hard to kind of make sure the spotlight's always on them. So if I tell a story during Beyond the Playlist, I usually cut my side of the story out because usually it's a story I've told 1,000 times, and the person I'm having on is hearing it for the first time. But also, it's not about me and my story; it's about them. So
Well,
I will slice out, excise a lot of stuff that I say just because it's it's not about them.
but there's so many, and we're going to talk about, and maybe if you're watching this on Patreon or want to, connect, go to meredithpatterson.com and send me a message and say, yes, let's do this. Because I'd like to do something called Mental Health Mondays, where maybe we connect. You and I can start and talk about your journey because I'm so fascinated by that and what you've gone through. And this is another thing. Like, we all think our life isn't interesting and we tell our story and people go, "What happened to you? What are you talking about?" Like every time we get on, we pop on because Hammond and I, if you're listening and don't know, Hammond and I pop on before we do our interview with the person that we're talking to, and we connect. And those little connections, we should probably, I don't know, we could record those because those are fun behind the scenes. But we talk, but that's when usually you'll tell me something that happened at the jail or random, and I'm like, uh, it starts my interview going, what?
Well,
Like I want to sometimes
even my
pop
first
back.
experience with 42nd Street was completely wacky.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I was thinking of the one at the jail where you said I can't do this every day, and we'll talk about it
Yeah,
in your
yeah,
in
no,
a mental health
yeah,
Monday.
but
But
no, but like I said, even in my first experience, my parents had taken me to New York, and I thought we were seeing 42nd Street and adopting a sibling, and found out my dad was doing spy work.
oh yes, I remember this. That's your 42nd Street connection.
Yeah.
Little did we know
Yeah.
on
And
the other
it
side of
was
the
a
curtain.
1982. I guess it was probably 81,
Yeah,
82.
not my 42nd
Oh,
Street,
not your
the
42nd Street.
original one,
Yeah,
the original.
you and I are close enough in age that you're like, wow, I'd like to do that someday. And I'm like, wow, I'd like to see that someday.
Well, the original Billy Lawler in that production is a friend of mine. His name is Leroy Reams. He's a brilliant Broadway star, and I've invited him to come on to this podcast. So that will be an
That'd be
interest. He would love that story.
fun.
We'll tell that story to Leroy. But yeah, so I just
So how
I
do you
feel
feel
like we're
about it?
doing good.
How do you feel about all this? I mean, you did Confessions of an Actress and you've admitted that it wasn't as focused as this is.
It was not focused. I
So
did not have
how do you feel about the fact that now you're focused? This is I guess a job in a way for
it.
you,
Yeah,
and you're treating it like that. So how do you feel about doing this as work?
I love it. I feel like I have to, I'm looking at, I have to work on my lighting. My lighting is changing every single time. You're going to notice this. This is just me being an entertainment industry person, having worked in TV and film. When I get on Zoom, I've never been so focused on the lighting and how to make sure it's not too bright and that my face is fully lit. All those things I didn't do any of that stuff. I literally was in my car. If you listen to those episodes, I'm in my car with my like little like speaker that went into my phone, and then I would quickly edit it. I'd change the music every 5 seconds. Now it feels more intentional. It feels more like a job. Yes. So it's that manifesting thing that I do feel like I'm really good at when I really focus on it. The intention is not to get paid, which I've talked about on an episode with Johan, like always feeling like I'm in survival mode. But the intention shift is my doing the best job I can for what I'm doing, going all in, which is in my personality, and making it good content that will last, let's say last after I'm long gone. It is something, it's like why I wrote my books, why told those stories, and being intentional where it feels like a job and it feels important for the world, not just me. Because I felt like Confessions of an Actress was like, I heard about this podcast thing. I'm going to try it. It was on a dare
Mhm.
and I did it, and it was a good intro into this. But there's still some good moments in that I'm really proud of. I spoke to my parents. My mom's no longer with us. I have her on there. We talked about her life. It's sort of like what was that old show? This Is Your Life. That's
Yeah.
kind of what it feels like. But it wasn't able to be like this show where it's very eclectic, where we have, George Visker from the 49ers, former 49er, talking about brain injury awareness, which is just a fabulous episode. And he's just an amazing person.
And it really shines we'll call it unflattering light on the NFL. And I don't know if it's still that way, but
It's,
at the time,
I have,
it was the ugliest light he could probably shine on it.
it is the ugliest light. And I actually applaud him for being really like vulnerable, honest,
Mhm.
and saying that because I know he has friends who are still in the NFL.
Mhm.
And here's the thing, I have experienced the same thing with Broadway. I've experienced the same thing with some Hollywood, experiences I've had. I think it's not to demonize, it's to inform people because it's our work. And any person who's 9 to 5, they have their stuff that goes on at their work. Ours is just more
Yeah.
in everybody's face, and everyone's like, it must be so glamorous. And you're like, well, it is. And there's this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So speaking of like the Hollywood world, and this again, you don't need to answer this, but it's something it just made me cross my mind when people think about that Hollywood kind of world. When was the first time you found yourself in a situation where you're like, oh, the I have to make some ethical, moral choices here. I'm in over my head. And if I don't make these choices right, I could be very successful if I make choices, but I need to be me. So do you remember when you had that conversation with yourself?
Yes, because it's very few and far between because I didn't put myself in situations where I was looking for that.
Mm-hmm.
I say that because there is a culture in Broadway and Hollywood where if you want to go down the casting couch world, you can, I'm sure. I never put myself in those parties or those situations. In the Hamptons in 2003, when I was out there starring in a show, and Julie Andrews was the director, it was very, very, a lot of stars came to that show. I mean, I met Billy Joel and Alec Baldwin, all these people coming, and I was like, oh my gosh. And there was a guy in the show who was of the Broadway world who invited me to a big party in the Hamptons with people I won't name. But they were big Broadway people, not Hollywood people, but there were Hollywood people there I heard about later. And it was to go and do some drugs and do some other things with people. And I have heard, as you know, you if you're in the industry, you know, oh, that person, well, you didn't get seen for that part because that part was already cast. And you're like, what do you mean? And they're like, well, that person slept with that person and that was how it went.
Mm-hmm.
And I've always felt, it's funny, I just talked to Dustin about this. I've always felt that would never be, I would never be able to survive knowing that that's what I did for that part. Because we're all talented. Let's just,
Mm-hmm.
we're not at this level when we haven't worked hard. You're not going to sleep with someone and then you can't sing or dance or act and get on Broadway. It's not going to happen. Not that I've seen.
Mm-hmm.
So I say that because I remember being invited to this party going and not knowing all the things the ins or out, but just instinctually. And I'm 27 at the time. And I was just like, no, I don't think I'm going to do that. And because I'd heard about those parties, I've heard about all the cocaine and all the things. And I just said no. And later on, they're like, oh, you should have known what happened at this party and that party. And I went, okay, that's not a road I ever want to go down.
Yeah. But
I did talk about it on my last podcast, how I had lunch with Alec Baldwin because he had come to see me in that show and he was very, very lovely and really, but I knew he was single at the time. I was engaged to my first husband and my first husband was like, yes, of course, go have lunch with him. It's great. And it was very, I met him at his penthouse. It felt very like I could have, I remember in these moments been like, I could have just said, let's stay here. Let's stay in your penthouse. Let's this, let's that. I'm not saying that Alec would have done anything, but I felt like I was in a situation where I knew he was flirting with me. I knew if I wanted to go down that road, I might have. I just don't think that way. I just can't. I am not someone who'd be able to look myself in the mirror.
well, but the idea of being aware of, oh, I'm in a situation where I need to, these choices are going to matter one way or the other.
Yeah.
That awareness is something I think is integral to like how you end up in life. Because if you hadn't been aware and you'd just been swept away by the moment, that's one feeling. But then also saying no and then regretting, that's another feeling. And the
Hmm.
fact that you made the choices, actively made the choices, that means there isn't regret. So, I mean,
Well,
well,
this is
you know what I mean, though. There's,
there would be yes, life's a series of choices, absolutely. And also when you see and you know that in the industry, all these talented people, there are some that are, and this is in Hollywood as well. I don't have that experience. I have some knowledge of Broadway. When you know that some of those stars who are in roles that you would be able to audition for and you would hopefully be up for got those roles by doing questionable things or doing things that were not an audition, if let's be honest, it's hard to see that marquee.
yeah,
It's hard to walk by that theater and go, do I have to do that to
yeah.
get there? Is that
Well,
what I have to do?
then there's the other question. I mean, and the non, how to call it, the non-important, the less important version of this is when you're in an office building when the managers all go out to smoke or go out to have drinks for lunch and you don't
Yeah.
go, and decisions and conversations are had in those groups that you're not part of. So, you have to make choices then. Do you care what happens? Are you gonna How do you respond to those decisions and conversations when they come back and say, hey, while we are out, you know having our three martini lunch, this is what we decided. How do you deal
Like I,
with that?
but I hear you. And I've been to those parties or dinner parties or whatever. And I could have even gone to that party in the Hamptons and not done
Yeah.
cocaine
Mm-hmm.
and not done anything questionable with anyone. But if I'm being honest, if I'm putting myself in a situation where there is drugs and alcohol involved, will something questionable happen? Maybe. I don't know. I go with my gut. It's how I survived being in New York for 20 years as a woman and just being by myself,
Mhm.
technically. I feel like there is nothing I've ever regretted. And also, I'm sure if you do sleep with someone or you do something to get a part, does everybody get that part? No. So then you're stuck with knowing that well, that's what I did and I didn't even get the part. So it's the mental game. It's hard enough anyway. It's such a hard business, and I just said it's not something I ever could do.
I mean, but going back to mental health, the fact that you were actively involved in making those choices, they weren't being made for you, you weren't being swept away, that plays to a certain level of internal strength that now that
Yeah.
you have, you can pass on to your kids, you can pass on to people you teach in classes. It's experiences you can have and have conversations with, new people coming into the fields, and experiences where you're like, yeah, you can get swept away. And it kind of could be easy to get swept away, but you have to be aware
Yeah.
and either actively, okay, I'm making the decision to be swept away by this, or
Yeah.
I got to throw an anchor down and maybe move a little bit slower.
Yeah. And it's something where you have to be, it's going back to, do I want to be famous or do I want to have integrity? I don't know. I'm not saying that you can't be famous without having integrity. Not everybody who's gotten roles has
Yeah,
done anything
no,
questionable.
it's not a mutually exclusive idea, but
Yeah.
there are probably compromises that are made
Hmm.
in the pathway to fame that might not be made if you weren't so focused on fame.
Yeah. For me, has always been focused on the work. I've always been focused on being the best that I can be. I will never ever say, oh, if I lost out on that part because they were just technically better than me, I will always celebrate that. It's harder when you go, I lost out on that part because they slept with the producer. And then you go, well, that's harder to,
Yeah.
to deal with. But I still don't regret that. It's just in low moments of spiraling, doom scrolling or whatever we do, and knowing that like it goes back to things I've said on this podcast before where I feel like I just want to be able to take care of my family and all this work that I've done to pay off in an actual dollar amount. It makes it hard when you see those people getting Tony Awards and multiple shows, and you're like, I know that they have all this money, but this is where I go, this is a curated life you're seeing as you're doom scrolling. You don't know what it's really like. And I don't know anybody that's made a choice in their life, this is entertainment industry or not, where you go, I know that I did something like really terrible to get to this place in my life. I have to look myself in the mirror as I'm brushing my teeth and know that about myself. I thankfully I have nothing that I look at myself and I go, gosh, you're a piece of shit.
So it's
I
funny.
really do.
It's
I don't
funny you
know.
say. It's funny we're having this conversation, because as we're having it, I feel like I'm a bit of a hypocrite, because I never woke up once in my life and said, "Hey, I want to be a crisis worker at a Metro jail." Never once did that cross my mind. Never
But you did
once.
it.
Yeah, and I fell ass backwards into it, and I have no idea really how I got there. It was
But a
just,
lot of people fall ass backwards into stuff that they're like, I mean, even people who are famous, they're like, I never thought I'd be doing this. Like, it's amazing.
yeah. It just, I feel
But the,
lucky though, because I
yeah,
happened to be. I mean, because of that job, because of how I was raised and who raised me, I was wired to survive in that environment for as long as I did.
yeah,
And if I had been a different kind of person, it could have either really broken me or really jaded me and really affected me in ways that I might not be here, period, because of that.
yeah,
So, it's funny how sometimes you end up sometimes in a place where you never thought you were going to end up, but in the end, it was actually the right place to be. I mean, I met my wife because of the job at the jail. I made
mhm.
friends because of that. I got the experiences dealing with situations, so that when I went and stage managed, if the main drape got stuck up and we couldn't get it down for intermission, guess what? No one's gonna die. We can load in the dark. I mean, I got no problems improvising and problem solving if no one's dying. I never got flustered.
You are in the place you're supposed to be.
Yeah, and it's really weird thinking though that you made all these active decisions, and I'm like, yeah, whatever.
Well, it's interesting because there's a lot of, as we go through life as an artist, there's a lot of things, thousands of things we audition for that we could have taken us down a totally different path that we actively auditioned, really committed to, really wanted those roles or that project, and it just didn't happen. And you hear about those stories, from celebrities like I was offered this role and I turned it down and it ended up, and then us as the audience is like, I can't even imagine anyone else in that part. And it was just one decision. So it feels so fragile, but it also feels like it is unfolding the way that it is. Because again, I wouldn't have the life I have now. I wouldn't have my kids, my husband, and all the things
Mhm.
if for some reason I went down a different path and made a different choice. That's why when I said it in the episode with Johan talking about my body, feeling it in my body if it's the wrong choice.
Mhm.
I've really been super, super focused on that the past like 10 years because I used to be like, oh, I'll excuse it away. But in making a choice, whatever it is, I sit and I go, how does this make me feel to do this? And sometimes I'm like, well, this feels terrible. And I ignore that feeling, and that's the wrong choice. It's pretty much always the wrong choice. And I know with you, with how you were raised, you kind of are able to compartmentalize some things that I know that I don't think I could.
You make it sound much better than it really
No,
is.
I,
I'm
I
I'm
just
I'm dysfunctional, and I use my dysfunction as a superpower.
that's okay too. I just feel like I don't know if that feeling I get in my body, if I could like clench that and put it away to just experience some of the things that you have, um, which I think is just,
Look, until you watch two grown men get into a poo fight like snowball fights
I
in a
know.
correctional facility, you haven't lived.
Or that, when they come into a jail and they have to get checked,
Mhm.
right? You were in
Yeah.
charge of that. And what's the checking involve?
So the reason I left the prison was because I did not want to search people my entire life. So I didn't want to look at nuts and butts my entire life.
Nuts and butts.
Hmm.
And that will be the episode title.
I mean, that was the main reason why I left the working as an active corrections officer and moved into corrections adjacent as a crisis worker.
But that was the final straw. You're
Mhm.
like, I just
It
can't.
was just a realization that if I'm here, I'm going to look at hundreds of scrotums every day.
And you're not a doctor.
No, it's
The
not.
doctors look at hundreds of scrotums and you're like, okay, this is not the same.
Yeah, no, I and at the time working at the state of Utah was 8.50 an hour, and you that was way too little money to look at that many scrotums.
It would be better to flip burgers at McDonald's than be scrotums, nuts and
I almost made
butts.
a horrible joke. Oh, what the hell, it's Patreon. At least there, the meat's already dead.
Oh my God. Are all, yes. Well, I was going to say something else, but anyway, yes. Oh, Hammond.
Yep.
This is fun, and I think whoever's listening to this on
Yeah.
Patreon is going to have some insight.
Yep.
Are
It's
you going? Are you going? You said you were going to a podcast convention.
well, okay. So one of the shows. So back in 2013, when I first started I started listening to podcasts in 2010, and then I accumulated a few shows I liked and got to know the hosts. And in 2013, I went to this event called Nerdtacular at Snowbird, and it's hosted by a guy who lives, I don't know, 25 minutes from me and runs a very successful podcast network. His name is Scott Johnson. His podcast network is called Frog Pants, and it's very
Nice.
much into gaming. Like he got his start podcasting doing a show based on the World of Warcraft game, and it became one of the largest podcasts in that space ever.
Nice.
And
Nice.
he knew all the Blizzard guys. He'd go to BlizzCon and do panels and stuff there. So he became kind of a big deal. Well, when I started Beyond the Playlist, I did a show. I went to Nerdtacular in 2013, which was in the summer, and I met Brian Ibbett and Scott Johnson and some of these other people. And then in October, I did my first show, which was Forgotten Flicks, Spooky Flicks Fest. And I had the best time talking about a really terrible movie. And I'm like, I came upstairs. I'm like, I have to chase this feeling for the rest of my life. This is what I need. And so I told my wife, I'm like, yeah, I'm going to start a show. And she's like, whatever. Uh-huh. And then in November, I did an hour on Brian Ibbett's Coverville Coverthon. He raises money for Alzheimer's.
Oh,
Uh,
nice.
Over on Black Friday, he'd do a 24-hour pod live stream and raise money for Alzheimer's. And
Yeah.
so I did an hour talking about music, and he and I realized pretty quickly that we have a lot of music knowledge between the two of us, and that the Venn diagram, what we like is overlapping, but what makes it great is the stuff that doesn't overlap. So we're like, okay, this is cool. So I got involved with Frog Pants, and they do a show every year called every day called the Morning Stream, and it's a hour, 2 hour, 90 minute, whatever live show every weekday.
Oh, wow.
And so Nerdtacular has been replaced by TMS Vegas, which is the morning stream down in Vegas. And so at the end of April, every year, we go down to the Plaza Hotel in Las Vegas and we do a few live shows. We have a meet and greet, we do some events, and then let's see, and then we do a live show, a live TMS. And in the live TMS, we do our own version of a British show called The Taskmaster.
Okay.
If you haven't watched Taskmaster, I highly recommend it. It's on YouTube and it's hysterical stuff.
Oh,
So
nice.
so anyway,
Nice.
I am the assistant to Brian when it comes to the Taskmaster. I help design some of the challenges, I help edit, I help doing stuff like that, and I co-host the live show with him. So
You're his Ed McMahon.
I'm everybody's like, man.
That sounds awesome. No,
Yeah.
that's so cool.
Yeah.
That's so cool.
You
Well,
should come down. You'd love
I would
Vegas.
love it. You
I
know
can
that I
tell
would
you.
love it.
You
That
do.
would be
Yeah.
fun.
Yes. My wife will be there, so other normal people will be there.
You're normal. No, but yes, it will be fun because if you guys are watching this on Patreon, we have never met, you
Yeah.
and I,
Yeah.
never been in the same room. This is how we've always met,
Mhm.
is through Zoom.
Mhm.
So thank you, Zoom.
Yeah.
But yeah, that would be really fun. I
Yeah.
feel like Dustin and I and you and your wife
Yeah,
are
no joke. If
here.
you want, I will send you the information right now.
Send it away.
Okay, I
Why
will.
not?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and that'd be great too, because then you'd get to meet Brian, who I want to have on this show, and
Yeah.
Tom, who you need to talk to soon.
Yes, 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 I have. So this is what's so fun about and we were and I'm gonna bring this back to networking in Hollywood, networking on Broadway, things like that. This is not we're not doing drugs and doing questionable things. We're just talking and networking. This is a good way of doing
Yeah.
it.
Yeah. This is sending emails to people saying two should know each other.
This is the honorable way of what the way that all the podcast world works and the entertainment industry works in a way of like, hey, let me call this person for
Actually,
you or whatever. It's not
actually,
doesn't always have to be a party in the Hamptons.
we actually have it set up now. So the horror movie, the next horror movie Olivia makes, you're getting murdered in.
I'm gonna be murdered. She actually wrote me. I wrote her and said thank you for the interview. It was really great. And she said, I can't wait to murder you. And I was like, I'm saving this email forever, and because I'm gonna like put my face, like I'll frame it with like my dead face.
Well, so that's now your second piece of merch. The other piece of merch is from Pregnant at 49 too. That's the merch that you need to have made, turned into shirts that you wear around Whitefish, Montana.
You have to listen to the part two to know what you're talking about, but because I can't say it out loud because I'll start
Not in
laughing.
public.
I can't.
Not in public, but you said it in a podcast.
I said it in a podcast, but I can't say it. I couldn't even wear a t-shirt that said it, but I said it to my yes, you'll let's listen to the episode. You know what I'm talking about. Um, it goes along with it should be right alongside the nuts and butts
Mhm.
episode for
Yep.
you.
Yep. Nuts and bolts.
Scrotums galore, or
Yep.
you can call it that.
Yep. Well, and also, I mean, here's another quick story. It gets cold in Utah. You know, it gets cold in the West. When they take off
I
their
know where this is going.
when they take off their shoes and socks, they search the sock and they flip the sock out. And one day, something went flying out of the sock, and the officer's like, "What is that?" And he's thinking it's contraband. He's thinking it's drugs or something. No, it was a guy's little toe.
What? His
Yeah, just
little toe
yeah, just
came on?
frostbite. Yep, frostbite right in the little toe. Popped it right off there in the searching area. So, of course, medical was called and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, that happened a couple times. Yeah.
Wow. That alongside the feces fight is just there's a lot there. It's
And to be
palpable.
honest with you, I think the officers really didn't need me to come down. I think they did it just so they experienced it with other people.
They didn't know. Did they know that that had they had this fight before?
No, this was a
This
brand
was
new event. These people were living life moment to moment, and they were two very professional criminals. One was getting extradited to South Carolina on a double murder, and the other was getting extradited to Texas on a multiple rape charge. And so they were professional criminals. They weren't new to the system.
yeah,
What had happened is they were in cells across from each other, and two cells down from one of them was this kid who refused to take his TB test, and you couldn't get put into population until you got
right.
your TB test. So he refused to give information at pretrial so they could get him out, but he also refused a TB test. So he was put down there, and then these two guys decided to engage in this snowball fight of sorts, and he was in the corner bawling. So the reason they called me down was actually for him. So I pulled him out and like, look, dude, you're in over your head. You're in a place where you shouldn't be, and right now you can get out if you do one of two things: give me your mom and dad's phone number, or take the TB test. Because if not, I'm putting you right back in there, and either you can play along or you can start learning how to dodge and duck.
Yeah. Ugh.
And he was like, my mom's number is here, and here's this. And so I'm like, okay. So they left him in the place where I had him. We called pretrial. He was out. He was out and dressed, ready to go 20 minutes later.
Oh my Lord.
And
I
the nice thing is we never saw that kid again. That was corrections at its finest. He never came back. He never got arrested again.
So there's the answer on how to stop incarceration.
Yeah. Stopping recidivism, expose everyone to a poo fight.
It needs to be a part of the entry system. You look at their nuts and butts, and then you bring them into a room and you say, "Do you want to have a poop fight? Because this is how you get out. This is how you don't ever come back here again." And then, yeah, that could be something. I
Yeah.
think you have something there.
It's something. Might not be
It's
ethical,
something.
moral, legal. It's something.
Fecal.
If you're planning that, you're immoral. If you're using it to your advantage, you're brilliant.
I think, yes, I think it's brilliant. I think it's both. I think it's a mix of both. And how much pink eye would you have to?
Oh gosh.
Yes. And on that note,
Yeah, I'm gonna actually stop recording right there.